Today, we celebrate the spring equinox, also called Ostra by some who follow earth-centered spiritual paths. I'd like to begin today's sermon with a poem written by my paternal grandmother, Vivian Niblick. You'll see the words of this poem in a moment, as well as a few snapshots of my grandmother, the poetess, in different seasons of her life. You might even see a younger Allison in one of those snapshots. This poem is entitled Unruly Spring. The sun goes out, the sun goes in, the clouds shift and shed. A balmy day lifts the daffodils up. A freezing wind bends their yellow heads. Patches of onion grass shoot and destroy the dignity of the lawn. Dandelions patch the yard with yellow, then blow white down all around. A mad quilt of color resuscitates a winter-weary world. Spring, unruly spring, we are that glad to see you. A mad quilt of color resuscitates a winter-weary world. Spring, unruly spring, we're that glad to see you. Indeed, and amen, grandmother. I love this conceptualization of spring as unruly, rebellious even. What can I say? I have a rebellious spirit, and I appreciate when I see echoes of that rebellion in the wider world. This poem also reminds me that the shift between seasons, at least here in the Lehigh Valley and Lenape-Hoking, always feels a bit one step forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back, until finally, after shuffle step dancing for a bit, we truly arrive in the season we are in. That shuffle step dance between winter and spring, that mad quilt of color, as my grandmother described it, feels like one of the more dramatic transitions we experience in the four-seasoned parts of the world. Moreover, when we think of the cycles of nature, agriculture, and their profound effects on our ancestors, the transition between winter and spring feels very much as if the previous year, with all of its joys and gratitudes, sorrows and concerns, has come to an end, and a brand new, yet unwritten year has begun. In all honesty, I feel a bit as if those of us who live in the four-season Northern Hemisphere should celebrate the new year in March, aka now, around the time of the spring equinox. Intuitively, considering the beginning of spring to be the beginning of the new year makes far more sense to me than marking the new year in the midst of the cold and struggle of January. However, since the advent of the industrialization and many of the inventions and discoveries that make our lives far, far easier than those of our ancestors, we may not feel the transition between winter and spring quite as poignantly. This makes sense, as our survival year to year is no longer as dependent on the end of winter and the advent of spring. I'd like to posit, though, that our souls remember. For those of us who live in four-seasoned parts of the world, or who have ancestors who lived in four-seasoned parts of the world, our souls know on some deep level that fall and winter are the times of year to slow down, to dream, to release, to turn our energy and our efforts inward. Our souls also know, according to my personal truth, that spring and summer are the times in which our heart quickens, when we can afford to speed up, to make our dreams reality, and to turn our energy and our efforts outwards. Here in the Lehigh Valley, our winter this year wasn't one of our worst, by which I mean it was not one of our coldest, iciest, or snowiest. And yet, it felt long. Oh, so long, at least to me. To be frank, since the COVID pandemic began in 2020, it has felt like one long, long winter. Some epidemiologists have suggested that 3 years in, the COVID pandemic in the United States has now reached the endemic classification, which roughly means that the virus and its patterns are steady and predictable in specific regions. However, not all epidemiologists agree with this perspective, and neither the Center for Disease Control nor the World Health Organization have declared COVID endemic, at least as of the time I finished writing the sermon. Moreover, classifying an illness as endemic does not mean that it is harmless. Tuberculosis has been considered endemic in specific populations, and most of us would not argue that tuberculosis is harmless. So we've bunny hopped from seasonal musings to a deep dive on a pandemic versus endemic classification of COVID, and you might be wondering why. I'm a clinical psychologist, not an epidemiologist. So I'm going to refrain from arguing about the nuances of microbiology and public health. What I can share, however, is that in my own lived experience, the beginning of COVID in 2020 felt like plunging into a 3-year cold, long winter. To be 100% honest with y'all, I don't know if any of us can say for sure that the COVID winter is over. It does seem, emphasis on the word seem, however, as if we're now inching into spring, both literally and COVID metaphorically. As we shared in our call to worship this morning, we speak spring because spring sings in us. We gather to nurture our faith in our own growing, our own courage to push through, our own blossoming and beauty, our own small part in the spring of this world. In that spirit of nurturing faith in our own growing as well as blossoming in beauty, I'd like to transition to the next and interactive part of today's service. This part of our service was inspired by and adapted from UU Minister Reverend Elizabeth Wen's 2021 Winter Light Sermon. Those of you who are joining us from the Active Life Center, we will be passing around a basket of seeds for you in a moment. These seeds were generously donated by my partner in UU Crime, Sue Weber. Thank you, Sue. They were also intentionally and lovingly selected as varieties of seeds that can be planted right now at the end of March here in the Lehigh Valley. Those of you joining us on Zoom, we invite you to send an email to me or to Sue. Our emails will appear in the chat in just a moment, and you can request your seeds, and we will mail them to you after today's service. In a moment, but not just yet, folks joining us on Zoom are welcome to take a look around and see if you can find a seed to use and join in our ritual. Maybe you have some birdseed nearby, or perhaps you have an everything bagel. Those have both poppy and sesame seeds. Perhaps your kitchen cupboard has pumpkin, chia, sunflower, or flax seeds. Quinoa, rice, and popcorn, those are all seeds too. Or maybe you're like me, you're planting your own garden and you have a handful of bulbs or some packets of seeds nearby. You could also imagine what your favorite seed looks like, or pull up an image of a seed in an internet browser. Zoomers, are the wheels turning in your brain? Cool. We're going to take about 2 minutes now for Zoomers to go look for a seed, and for folks in the Lehigh Valley Active Life Room to select their seeds from those available. Lehigh Valley Active Life folks, please take the variety of seed that speaks most to your heart in this moment, and then pass the basket to your neighbor. has their seeds now, real or imagined? Excellent. Let's take a moment now to hold our seeds up to our camera if we're online, or if you're in the Lehigh Valley Active Life room, you can hold your seeds about at chest height where your neighbors can easily see them. Gonna take a look. So many beautiful seeds. Thank you, everyone. If you're a gardener, you might know that seeds are phenomenally resilient little creatures. In 2021, the BBC shared a story about two women scientists who successfully grew previously extinct date trees from seeds that were over 2,000 years old. You heard that right, 2,000 years old. Keep your eye on UUCLV social media. We'll be sharing that story soon. Even when the circumstances aren't quite as dramatic as resurrecting an extinct tree, seeds are resilient survivors. Some seeds even need dramatic conditions, conditions that look daunting or insurmountable to a human in order to grow. Did you know that there is such a thing as a pyrophytic plant? The ears of my fellow fire lovers may have just perked up. A pyrophytic plant is a plant that needs fire in order to reproduce. Sequoias and pine trees are some examples of pyrophytic plants or phoenix-like plants that literally need to burn in order to release or germinate their seeds. Some other seeds might need what we call cold stratification, which essentially means that they must be exposed to the cold and damp of winter in order to germinate once spring arrives. Like I said, the seeds are survivors. Some need to freeze, some need to burn, some can even be resurrected 2,000 years later. When we think of this resilience, this strength, I'd like us to take note of our own strength and resilience, and of the strength and resilience of our beloved community. It has been a long, long COVID winter, dear ones, but we might, just might, finally be reaching spring. I invite you now to hold your seed or seed pack in whatever way is most comfortable for you. And I'd like you to think about what you'd like to grow in your life. This might be something that you want to grow in your personal life, in your family life, in your professional life, maybe even in the life of the UUCLV community. I'll give you a moment now to identify what it is that you'd like to grow. Got it? Great. Whatever it is that you wish to grow in your life, I want you to envision that and notice what you see, hear, and feel as you imagine it. Maybe even notice what emotions come up in your body and where and how you feel those. I invite you now to infuse your seeds with that mental and emotional energy that we just created, that magic, if you will. Beautiful. After today's service, I invite you to plant these seeds, remembering again what you see, what you hear, and what you feel as you envision what you would like to grow. All of the seeds that we picked for today can be planted outside right now in the Lehigh Valley. If you don't have an outdoor gardening spot, or if you'd prefer to grow your seeds indoors, you can do that too. Our souls speak spring, dear ones. We speak spring because spring sings in us. May it be so, and may you be blessed.